Hi everyone, just a little reminder that the time this goes up live on YouTube, public to everyone, the same time that happens on Patreon there will be Episode 6 Early Access available. I've talked about this before, but starting in Episode 6 is when full length is also available. So at the time that this video is posted and publicized on YouTube, you can not only go to my Patreon to watch the early access of Episode 6 for $5 patrons, but if you're a $10 patron, you can also check out the full length for Episode 6, and that will continue until the end of the series. So just reminding you of that, in case anyone's interested. Hope you enjoy this reaction, and thanks again for watching. Hello, welcome back to my reaction series of Arcane. Today we're going to be doing Episode 5, entitled Everybody Wants to Be My Enemy. Pretty direct allusion to the opening right there, through the title, so interested to see what that's all about. Episode 4 was really great in terms of establishing where a bunch of these characters and plot threads are post-time skip after the huge bombshell at the end of Episode 3. Through what they explored through Jace, Victor, Medarda, the societal situation in Piltover, Heimerdinger, and how he relates to all of that. It was all really good, really rich, really interesting. Clearly this new industrial revolution, this new revolutionary age of Hextech has completely taken off. And that has different ramifications for all of our characters, and we see through their reactions to these things more and more of who they really are at heart and what their ambitions are and how they contribute to the story. So it was all really great. All the Piltover stuff was amazing. It continues to be a really interesting aspect of the story, these sort of sociopolitics, all of these themes associated with the aristocracy and the power in Piltover and the human element to it as well. Particularly shown through Victor and Jace. We also saw a bit of the underground, more than a bit actually. Even if it didn't have as much of a focus as the Piltover stuff, it was pretty substantial in the episode. We saw a lot of Silco and who we now know as Jinx, and their relationship is really interesting, the hints of the dynamic they share, and I'd love to see more of that. I think it's pretty clear what has happened in the ensuing time and why Jinx is this way. I think we got enough information for that. I don't think we necessarily need them to dwell on the time skip or what happened during it, but more exploration for Jinx would be great, because she's super interesting right now. I'd love to know more of what's going on in her mind, and more of her point of view. And same with Silco. He's such a fascinating character, and we know quite a bit about him. I'd like to learn more. And I think that's going to happen. I think it's pretty clear that the show is going to focus on those two, their partnership and what's going on there, particularly with how they're going to approach the future now that they have this new gemstone, and if they can potentially harness it and maybe make some ground on Piltover with the power they get from it. So we'll see. Something else that came out of Episode 4 was that Caitlyn is now a primary, prominent character, a point-of-view character, and I think that's great. The glimpses we saw of her in the first act were fine, but now she's much more interesting in my eyes. She's an enforcer, but she's the most humanistic point of view for the enforcers that we've seen. We do have Marcus, and we did have Grayson before, and they were human views of it as well in different ways, and Marcus continues to be. I hope they explore him a bit more, because they give a bit of subtext to what he might be doing, but didn't directly dwell on it, so I hope we see some of Marcus as well. But going back to Caitlyn, she seems to embody what an enforcer should be, the ideal of an enforcer, the spirit of what an enforcer should stand for, rather than the corruption that we may have seen prior. She is very direct, very focused. She's a go-getter. She sees injustice or things that might be disrupting things negatively in Piltover, and she just goes for it. She tries to solve these mysteries. She tries to get to the root of things. And I love that. It's very refreshing. And she doesn't care about societal hierarchies. She doesn't care about her family's birthright or her blood or what that may mean for her status. She doesn't want to be coddled. And I love all of that. It's very endearing. So Caitlyn has shot up the ranks after Episode 4, and I can't wait to see more of her journey. And that seems to be coinciding with Vi, who seems to be arrested in prison. And Caitlyn, in the last scene, went up to Vi's cell to talk to her about something, likely to question her about why she attacked that inmate. Additionally, there was stuff about the Firelights, this third party, this mystery team of what seems to be anarchists with their own ideals. Not too sure about that, but very interesting plot thread that they're obviously going to explore, so I can't wait to see where that goes. Anyway, with that long preamble out of the way, sorry if it was a bit too lengthy, let's just jump right in. I'm excited. Episode 5. I think I saw Caitlin. More Caitlin focus. Yep, more Caitlin focus is great. Visuals are beautiful, by the way. The show is so dynamic in direction, I love it. Oh, Grayson. So she was training to be an enforcer when we got to learn about her in Act 1. I had no idea. Maybe I just missed something. So beautiful.
You held your shot. I saw you.
The trophy is yours. You earned it. I'm an enforcer. For me, knowing how to handle this weapon means being able to protect people. To be of service to the city. What are you shooting for?
What are you shooting for? You can see the influence those words had on her with how she's going after these mysteries now.
Take a look at your file. What are you here for?
My sunny personality.
This was a waste of time.
Couldn't have put it better. Hey, give Silco a kiss on that winning eye of his, will you?
They're getting there quick.
Send in.
She's not going to be able to let this slide. Yeah.
Does this mean anything to you?
Where did
Wow.
you get this?
I need proof if I'm to believe what you're saying about Silco.
I could get it for you. Just not from in here.
In what mad world would I trust someone like you?
Is this not a mad world?
Enforcers are all the same, just asshole criminals in fancy uniforms. You know what? Find Silco yourself.
I will, thank you.
She's not the same as other
Hunter said
enforcers.
he's gonna eat.
We got a new partnership? What an unlikely duo. So I thought that we'd get to the point where, through talking with Caitlin, that Vi would realize that Jinx/Powder was making some sort of ruckus, but I didn't imagine that we'd get there so quickly. That was a pretty quick development, but another great opening scene.
These brave enforcers sacrificed their lives to defend the values of our great city. Sons.
Marcus focus? That's exactly what I asked for.
Daughters.
Beautiful scenery. This episode already seems to be a bit more poetically shot. If that makes sense. Maybe it's just me, but...
Who was this, Daddy?
A good woman.
The contrast between the
You
influence...
said you could control her. I lost 6 officers.
I'll finish that thought later.
6! She pushed it too far this time. The council's up in arms. I can't make this
Okay.
go away for you unless you give me something to work with.
Sorry for pausing. I try not to do this at all, but I just need to get this thought out so I don't forget it. So through just the first, 7-8 minutes of the episode, we already see the influence that Grayson has had as a character, or as a person, as a leader, and as an ideal on both Marcus and Caitlin. Her words are a source of inspiration for Caitlin and a source of regret for Marcus, because he is clearly in this corner now that we see him continuing to do things for Silco, as was hinted at in the previous episode. We see him in this corner where he looks at the grave of Grayson and he remembers her fondly and admires her as this role model who embodied the sort of ideals that he wants to, but can't. And I think that's very sobering, but at the same time, he's not doing something that's right, even though seems to be forced into some corner, it's the end result of his own actions, right? That he started back in Act 1. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Caitlin is using the things that Grayson taught her for other ends, more good ends, more productive ends that are more in line with where her ideals actually are, whereas Marcus's are much more incongruent, it seems. And I think that's really interesting. That characterizes Grayson after her death in a way that I didn't really think of. And I love when shows are able to characterize and substantiate and further enrich characters after their deaths, even if they're minor like this. It's really good. Sorry for pausing. And also, yeah, this is confirmation that Marcus is working with Silco, and it looks like the funeral he was just at was for the people who died in the fire that Jinx caused, that she went way overboard, which we already know she did. But Silco's likely to forgive it because of what it led to, the gemstone.
The Firelights have been a thorn in both our sides. They ambushed my shipment at the Hex Gates on the same day as the attack.
Okay,
It seems
so the
to me
Firelights
the
are
Council has
a
its
thorn in
faults.
the Enforcer sides as well.
But we've accomplished a lot together, Marcus. Sheriff. And there is more yet to achieve.
Silco doesn't seem to care much about the collateral damage.
Yesterday's smuggling fiasco was nothing. These manifests are full of discrepancies dating back months.
This is a poor use of our time.
Soon we can do everything.
Soon? There are people who need our help now, Jace.
And the only assurance I need is that you will search and seize any unauthorized merchandise. I've made a list of suspicious transactions.
He knows all about
Hold your
those.
respect, Counselor.
This
Before-
corruption runs deep, Sheriff. I intend to root it out.
Oh boy.
Gang. They call themselves Firelights. They operate like phantoms doing hit and runs.
I've swing contract.
My boy's not looking good.
Victor, you alright?
What was that?
A headache.
That Milo figure. The doll.
And this. So, here goes.
Oh, so she's figuring it out. Who better, right? Oh. Poor girl. Of course, she just still killed 6 people, so not excusing that, but still hard not to feel sympathy for her. How long's it been since she's been outside?
Has a nice view.
Too risky.
Well, you're gonna learn some things today, Caitlin. Oh, she's loving it. She's loving being able to do this again. When's the last time she stretched her legs? The contrast. Back on home soil. Great shot. Oh, that's so funny. The guy who was there at the station earlier on beats her here. That's so funny.
Don't you want to blend in?
This is great. This dynamic's so awesome. Caitlin in the lanes is amazing. Adorable.
Are you sure this is safe?
Of course not.
Doesn't matter if it's safe or not. He has no time.
Oh, Jericho, have I missed these?
So, not everything's been overturned in the lanes. Small businesses still have their place.
what?
I didn't break you out of jail to eat. Slop. I knew this was a terrible idea.
I haven't been here in years. Since my parents brought me for the Winterfest.
We're not here for the performance.
So she's teaching him
Counselor's Hoskins.
how to play the
Bay
game.
Charities for the fine and Noxian spirits. Technically an illegal import.
I tightened our security.
And in so doing, put a target on your back.
The Golden Boy's got to get more
You've
pragmatic.
just made yourself everyone's common enemy, Jace.
It's a necessity, but at the same time... Oh, this is where they were hanging out.
What's the matter, Milo? Worried Powder's gonna beat you again?
Oh. She was always a sharpshooter.
What makes you different? Makes you strong.
She's embodying her, in a way. Oh, this episode is so dynamic, it's great. Great transition. That was really interesting. I'm not sure I understand the full meaning of it, but lots of ideas. Heimerdinger's alone?
I never wanted anything to do with politics. You pushed this on me.
You're a symbol of the future now, Jace, whether you like it or not. With that comes the potential to shape your own destiny. The council assumes you'll fail.
The thing is, this is kind of in his best interests,
Welcome, Amara.
and kind of
How's
not,
little Rohan?
in terms of his
Counselor
where his
Tallis.
heart is.
Councillor Tallis is willing to reinstate former trade privileges to those who share his vision.
You know, Counselor Madara is right. The Hex Gates are only the beginning.
Here we go.
In fact, we're currently looking for new partners in our Hex Tech research.
Gotta put your hand in those pockets.
How can I say no to such an auspicious offer?
Your audience awaits, Councillor.
Oh, this is so well directed.
He's been quite the investment.
Indeed. Better than expected.
Oh, this is so good. Oh, what a scene. Every counselor. But is he gonna include Heimerdinger? Looks like no Heimerdinger. No. He seemed to be the only one to not have a partner watching this. To not have his hands in someone's pockets or have some under the table deal. Which is very symbolic, I think. Still stuck in the past a little bit.
The one place all the secrets are spilled.
Brothel? Black Sails logic. Secrets are spilled in a brothel. Oh,
How?
she's a little interested.
If you really want people to talk to you, you have to let them think you have what they want. You're hot, Cupcake.
Ooh,
So what'll it be, man or woman?
I ship it.
Hi.
Their dynamic is so great already. Vi and Caitlin.
The Hex-Tech Wonder Boy is on the council now. And he's asking questions. It's only a matter of time before he finds the truth.
What is truth but a survivor's story?
If I'm discovered, we're both finished.
Interesting line.
Good thing you've located proof of the Firelight's involvement.
Oh boy.
This has gone too far.
Imagining yourself a hero. Then what are you waiting for?
Wow, this is great work for Marcus. Great character work for Marcus. He is stuck. But again, kind of the result of his own one-mindedness in the beginning.
You need to weaponize the Hex Tech soon. You're the only one I can trust with this, Jinx.
I keep seeing them. That day.
The only one he can trust.
Fear haunts us all. Child.
By the looks of it, no one down here lifted a finger to stop Silco.
Things have changed without Vander looking out for us.
He leaves and everything goes to
Have you heard
shit.
anything about Powder?
Or he dies, rather.
I have to find her.
Silco's number 2's a regular. I can have Miguel tell you where to find her.
I owe you.
Yeah, it's clear. Vander dies and the place falls apart.
Magical gardens. This is all I've seen.
She's taken to this. Look at her.
You did well today.
I had a good teacher. My father put hammers in the hands of the people, and they built this magnificent city. Imagine the wonders they could create if we put magic in their hands.
Again, that it's
The world will never be the same.
such an idealistic, well-intentioned
Regardless of what you
dream.
only take from the world.
But he's straying.
We're not.
And again, what are her intentions here? And meanwhile, Victor toils away against the clock.
That's beautiful.
I can't figure out why it's not working.
You will. Are you headed home soon? I thought we could walk together.
I'm probably going to sleep here tonight.
Again?
She's sweet. Poor Victor. Oh, the contrast. Oh boy. This is really well done as well. Very metaphorical of what's going on with Jace, yeah. Yep. Interesting. This episode is very artistic.
I almost drowned in these waters.
You told me 1,000,000 times.
That day, I let a weak man die.
The man who the water tempted.
And another was reborn.
Baptism.
Betrayal can either break you or forge you into something greater. You need to let Powder die. So the
Okay.
fear of pain will no longer control you.
He sees herself so much in her.
Jinx is perfect.
Jinx is perfect. Wow. Self-affirmation. Oh, so she must be going to the second in command. Oh, okay. She's the second in command. Marcus. He's in a very tough spot. Is he the man his daughter would be proud of? Oh, this is so good. Oh. See,
Victor. The doctors.
he is holding on to his sense of self with everything he's got. Jace, I mean.
How much time do I have?
And Victor. God, your heart goes out to him. Oh, this might be my favorite episode, to be honest.
You filthy traitor. Vander had his chance.
Oh, so they've completely weaponized Shimmer. Much more regulated than before.
I see you never learned patience.
Ironic she never learned patience while waiting in prison for years.
Where's my sister? Where's he keeping her?
Keeping her? You mean Jinx? She works for him. She's like his daughter. I'll give her your regards.
He's gonna stop her.
Why did you let her go?
Do you ever say thank you?
He's gonna know we're here now.
Whose fault is that?
You're an alright shot.
I'm an excellent shot. My name is Caitlin.
You're
OTP.
so sweet. Like a cupcake.
OTP.
Shut up.
How sweet. She got it? Has she got it? The bunny!
The sister. She's back.
From the dead.
That was an amazing episode. Holy shit. The show is so good. It might not surpass episode 3 just because that was such a stunning encapsulation of what was building up in the first two and a half episodes or so. But you know what? I think it does. That was just so well presented. The best directed episode so far, I think. Pretty clearly. Not that the others were badly directed. I complimented them, I think, in every reaction. But this is on another level. And the storytelling was so good. I don't know how I'm going to cut up the reaction because the whole thing was so good. So that was awesome. That was amazing. I said in the middle of the episode that this is my favorite episode, or that this may be my favorite episode, and then I thought back to episode 3 and how great that was, and how dramatic and just well done the ramping tension was, and the payoff and the culmination at the end. But to be honest, I still think, with episode 3 in mind, that this is my favorite. There was just so much nuance, subtlety, substance, and all of that packed into the character interactions, so much quality and artistry that went into the presentation to accentuate this writing, and I don't know, it was it was just amazing. I had to, for the first time in these reactions, I had to write down some notes so that I don't miss anything, you know? I don't want to miss out on any details that I found were notable, because there is so much here. I'm going to try to keep it as concise as I can, but no promises. This might be my longest reaction, and I've had some pretty long reactions. But yeah, just to sort of dwell on the presentation and direction a bit more, from the very beginning where we have the Caitlin flashback with her and Grayson, there's such beauty in the fog, these barren trees, this snow, the autumn leaves. I couldn't tell if this was the transition from autumn to winter or winter to spring, like late winter. But either way, it was beautifully done. The aesthetic was gorgeous. The framing and composition of a lot of the shots was really good. And the same thing continued into the funeral that Marcus had for his fallen enforcer comrades, where there were some beautiful shots of the nature in the graveyard, lots of good framing and that sort of thing. And then as the episode goes on, there's just even more dynamic scenes, some great transitions, some fluidity in the animation, the fight scenes, so much dynamism everywhere. Caitlin's shooting practice, I noticed some really nice stuff through zoom-ins on the bullets. And we have Jinx's punching practice where she was being compared to past Vi. That was very dynamic too. We have the scene of Vi walking through the lanes looking for Savika, where with that sort of EDM dubstep version of the opening playing in the background. But just everywhere there was lots of dynamism. It was put together so well. And not to say that the series hasn't been brilliantly directed and brilliant aesthetically before this, because I've complimented it a ton. But this was just a step up, I think. And then it sort of culminates at the end with this poetic, artistic baptism of sorts for Jinx, where Silco puts her in the water to sort of kill off Powder because of how much grief and fragmentation it's causing in her psyche. I'm going to get into that scene later in what I thought about it, but just the presentation of it was so mesmerizing. I was hanging on to every word. It was great. And just the episode in general, it's just a great work of art. It was beautiful. And so if we get into the actual content of the episode, I'd say that that episode 5 was an episode of duos, an examination of where they've been, where they're going, the dynamics between these duos, and everything that it says about the story as a whole, and where we're at, sort of at this midway point. So in terms of duos, there was Caitlin and Vi, Caitlin and Grayson, Grayson and Marcus, Silco and Jinx, of course, Medarda and Jace, which continues to be more and more excellent and interesting and keeping me guessing. And then we have Jace and Victor, of course, which is sadly becoming a bit less and less of a partnership. But at the end, I think it was reinforced that Jace is still very much a partner to Victor. It just seems that regardless of his intent, he seems to be going further and further away from him, which is super sad. Again, I'll get into that later. But yeah, like I mentioned when I paused it, through the brilliant opening scene with Caitlin and Grayson, transitioning into the scene with Caitlin and Vi, and then through the funeral that we have with Marcus for fallen comrades, the character of Grayson has quite an influence on this episode. Through how we see her and how she impacted both Caitlin and Marcus, and how they sort of diverge in the way in which they enact how her guidance has influence their lives and how they execute that. Of course, their circumstances are very different, but on one hand, we have Caitlin, who couldn't care less about any of the posturing, any of the political machinations, any of that. And we have Marcus, who is bound by them. And of course, I think Marcus is much less able to enact things in the way he would like to execute his heart's desire, because he's very trapped, it seems like. He's stuck in between Silco's needs and Piltover's needs, and he doesn't have much agency himself. You can't really compare him to Caitlin and say that Caitlin is doing things better, because while she does have filial obligations, it seems like, they aren't so stifling that she isn't able to have a life for herself. You know, her parents probably don't want that life for her as much because of the danger it puts her in, and because they probably want a much more snooty desk job. Not to say that all desk jobs are snooty, but you get what I mean. But she doesn't want that for herself. Jace wanted that for her, she doesn't want it for herself. And there aren't much consequences for her, apart from some disapproval. So I think she's much more able to execute what Grayson has taught her than Marcus, but I still think it's interesting to compare and contrast how what Grayson means to them is being manifested in their current directions and trajectories. I won't go too much into depth about this because I, again, mentioned it when I paused, but with Caitlin, she's very much following her heart and following the things that Grayson taught her in a very direct way. She's very focused on that. In the episode, Grayson talks about how, as an enforcer, her job is to be of service to the city, to enact her own form of personal justice. And she then asks Caitlin, what are you shooting for? What is your form of justice? And from what I can tell, her form of justice ends up being very similar to what Grayson embodied, being of service to the city and doing what she thinks is right, simply. And that's what she's doing in this second act of the story. She is following her heart in terms of what she's actually doing, in terms of her actions. She doesn't care if it's not proper, if she's not been given the approval to do these things. She's doing it because she believes that's what's right. She believes that's what's in service of the city. And so she is very much following the ideals that Grayson left behind after she died. And I mentioned it earlier that Caitlin seemed to have been training to become an enforcer before Grayson's death, because Grayson was this sort of mentor to her, and she died pre-time skip. So Caitlin didn't just try to become an enforcer during the ensuing years. She was training to be one before that. I had no idea at all. I'm not sure if there were hints, but if there were, I didn't catch them at all. So very interesting. Whereas on the other hand, I'm so glad we got some focus on Marcus. He, as well, is a bit of a more prominent character here, and I'm really glad because he offers a great insight into the politics of both Piltover and the Underground, of Zaun, of the Lanes. I don't know, there seems to be a bunch of synonyms for the Underground. I'll probably interchange them a lot. But one of the things I really wanted for this episode was some more clarity about what's going on politically underground. And we definitely got it, and Marcus was a big reason for that. We see that he's continuing to have this agreement with Silco. He's continuing to allow for these smuggling deals to go on, to have Silco to have his resources and trade and influence and be economically viable. The Firelights are obviously disrupting that. We didn't get much of the Firelights in this episode, aside from that little tidbit, that the Firelights are both an enemy to both the Enforcers and Silco, the Undercity. I was wondering in a previous episode whether they were enemies to the Enforcers. They are. It was stated clearly that they are. And so they're interrupting this trade, but nevertheless, essentially Marcus is allowing Silco and his organization to maintain as much power as they can, to know what's going on politically in Piltover, and all that good stuff. You can tell that this very much goes against what his idea of justice is. Through the look we had of him at Grayson's gravestone, and the things he said to his daughter about Grayson. Let me look up the exact line. Yeah, so his daughter asks, as he's looking up at Grayson's statue, who was this? And Marcus replies simply, a good woman. And what I get from that is that he very much admired Grayson as a role model, as a person to aspire to be. And so that tells me that I don't think it's assuming too much by concluding that his ideas of justice are very similar to hers. But as opposed to Caitlin, he can't enact them. His hands are tied. And, of course, he made his bed to an extent in Act 1, but regardless, it's hard not to feel a little sympathetic for that. Caitlin's able to completely follow those ideals, and he is completely not able to. And we have that wonderful little scene of him looking at the Firelights, the evidence that he's supposed to plant to say that the Firelights were responsible for everything that went on with the fire, not Silco's people, not Jinx. And he clearly doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to do that at all. He doesn't want to continue with this charade of covering for Silco. But, what are the ramifications if he doesn't? His hands are pretty much tied. They killed Grayson. I'm sure they could very easily do that to him. And now he looks at this photo of his daughter, who he now is looking after. I don't know. It seems like he didn't have a daughter pre-time skip. Now he has someone he's very responsible for. And so I think there's two elements to him looking at that picture. Firstly, he worries for the safety of his daughter. If he's gone, what's going to happen to her in this harsh world? And also, the things he's doing, I feel like he's thinking about his daughter and thinking, am I the man I want my daughter to see me as? Am I being a good father by doing these things? Can I be proud of what I'm doing? And I think the answer to that is a resounding no. as he takes his whiskey glass or whatever he was drinking and chucks it. He is in a awful place right now, and I'm really glad that we got all of this character work for him. But then more than accentuating this character work for Marcus and Caitlin, I think we get a bunch of characterization for Grayson herself after her death. There's, of course, the things we see about her ideals. That's very clearly presented. The type of person she tried to be, the type of enforcer she wanted to be. I mentioned that Caitlin, in the beginning, before the reaction, was someone who seems to be one of the only real enforcers who carry out the ideal image of what an enforcer should be, the good and just image. It seemed like Grayson was one as well. And she did that through very pragmatic methods. Her deal with Vander, I often talked about that deal between Piltover and the Undercity, between Vander and Grayson, that kept the status quo and maintained things so that things could work both ways. I always talked about that deal from Vander's point of view, from how pragmatic and intelligent it was for him to maintain that deal and keep it because he realized what conflict would lead to. And of course, it wasn't the thing that everyone in the lanes would want to happen, but it's what he believed had to happen for them to have a life. And I talked in the first 3 episodes about how, even though it wasn't, the perfect solution, it was a solution, and I think it was a smart thing for him to have done, even if not everyone would understand that. But from the other side, I didn't really talk about Grayson and what that meant for her. Her ideal of justice, to be in service of the city, to do what's right, involved a deal with someone who was from the Undercity, was from the leader of these oppressed people, of this city that's in the dark, in the shadows, that's spit upon. She made this deal that would help them function, that would help the people in the underground have a life. It may not be the best life, but it's the best that they could realistically ask for without things being broken, without the scales being broken and things becoming completely chaotic. She cared for the people of the Undercity. Of course, this deal made things run smoothly for Piltover as well. No denying that. There was reasoning on her part to make Piltover this smoothly run place. Again, like she told Caitlin, she works in service of the city. This serviced the city. By keeping them in tow, by keeping them at arm's length, this made things much less problematic than they would have been for Piltover. But at the same time, through her conversations with Vander, you can clearly see that she worried for him, she cared for him, she cared for his people. She didn't want things to go badly for him. And of course, she was cutting at times. She was harsh at times and rough. But I definitely got the impression that she wanted things to be... She wanted there to be a life for the people underground. And so I think that really came to my mind through seeing what her form of justice was. That made me reflect on Grayson as a character. And I think this episode substantiated her further and made her a richer character post-death. And I think that's great. I love when stories are able to do that. She probably didn't approve of the oppression that the Undercity were experiencing, and so through her deal with Vander, she tried her best to allow them to have lives to live. And I think that's something that's very notable. So I think the next topic naturally would be Caitlin, since we were just sort of talking about her a little bit. So Caitlin and Vi have some amazing adventures in this episode. Just right from the off, I love their dynamic. I love their banter. They're immediately a great partnership. There are definitely romantic notes there. A bit of sexual and romantic chemistry there. I 100% see it. I ship it. They're great together. I love it. It's all great. I loved the contrast between Vi just breathing in that fresh air after she sort of leaves the prison, looking down and then completely parkouring it. She's so adept at doing all of that. She takes to it like a fish to water, navigating these roofs and getting down to the Undercity. And the contrast with Caitlin is adorable. Caitlin is not used to this at all. She's a bit more uptight. She may be a great shot, but she's not used to any of this at all. So it's really cool to have this contrast between someone who's lived all their lives in the Undercity and being very street smart and casually just able to do all these things, and having someone from Piltover who, despite being a huge contrast to the aristocracy, is nonetheless used to that sort of life and not used to being in the Undercity at all. She's not street smart, simply due to a lack of experience. And so I loved the contrast in how they're navigating those buildings to show that off. Really great visual storytelling in terms of their characterization. And then we have Vi obtaining some information through that food stall, which is another economic sort of tidbit. Despite Silco taking over the last drop, despite him taking over the underground, it seems like not everything has gone to hell. There are still small businesses that are flourishing, and that's interesting. I don't gain a ton of meaning from it, but it looks like not everything has been completely revamped. There are still things that remind Violet of home, and that's interesting. But nonetheless, she gets that information from him. They then go to the brothel. They then have that great moment of sexual tension there. And Caitlin is told that she has to pretend that she works there. And at first it seems like she's very uncomfortable with the idea, but we see afterwards that she as well took to it like a fish to water. I guess it just took a bit of her walls being broken down, her psychological walls being broken down. It didn't escape me that as she's passing by these rooms where people are doing all sorts of perhaps deviant acts, she seems to be in shock as she moves past one, but then glances back in there. She's curious about it. So she's not as innocent as we might have initially assumed. It's all great, charming character work. I love her with Vi. It's great. So then after she gets the information from the brothel owner, it seems like, maybe the owner, maybe just a prominent figure there, she realizes that Silco's number 2 might have information about Jinx or Powder. And so she hunts her down. What I find very interesting is that I was wondering how Violet might be post-time skip. She isn't hugely different from pre-time skip, but she's now possessed by this rage. Before, I think she was able to hold things back a little bit. Maybe not, but she was very instinctual. She was very reckless, and she went headfirst into things. The first mission in episode 1 being one of those, the rescue mission for Vander being another, though you can obviously understand why she did that. But it was undoubtedly a headstrong thing to do. She's not scared to do these things. As much as understandable as it was, just a statement of fact. I would have done the same thing. But yeah, Violet has always been headstrong. She's been very instinctual. She acts with her heart more so than her head. And the feeling I got from Act 1 was due to Vander and what he was teaching her. I thought that Violet maybe had the capability of being able to be as pragmatic as Vander was, to not think with her heart as much as her head, because that's what Vander did through this act. I'm sure there were many situations where he would have wanted to act on his rage, on his hatred, but had to dial that back to think of what was best, to think with his head. Many situations, like these tense political situations, need a cool head, and that's what Vander was. And so I got the impression that Violet was slowly learning from Vander, and that she had the capability to not completely act with her hatred, and not completely, totally act with her heart every time. But I think his death kind of curtailed that. I think it made it so that there's no real possibility of that anymore. She saw Savika, she saw the role she had in everything that happened in the conclusion of episode 3, and she couldn't hold herself back. She just kneed her in the face or kicked her in the face. And who can blame her, right? So I think one of the most notable things, the most notable thing about Violet is that she just doesn't care. She will act with her heart. She will act on her rage. Very predictable sort of thing. Not in a bad way, but the sort of thing you'd expect. She's very invested in, the foremost thing in her mind is trying to get to Powder, trying to save her, because she assumes her to be a captive. And at the same time, she's bashing heads on the way. Any head she can get her hands on that contributed to her pain, whether it be the inmate that got taken in at the prison, whether it be Savika. And I think the idea that Jinx may not, or Powder, in her, from her perspective, may be there of her own will, is going to be a brutal reality check. It's going to be a shock. I don't think she fully believed Savika. She seemed a little bit shocked when she told her that, but I don't think she fully believed her, and I think seeing that will be very revelatory for her and her character arc. So we'll see what happens there. Something to add with Violet is that I think back to something Vander said to her when he turned himself in, or tried to take her place when she was trying to turn herself in at the beginning of episode 3. He said to her that she has a good heart, that her heart is in the right place, and that she should never let the world break that spirit. She should never let herself get lost. That she should not lose her sense of self, no matter how much the world tries to break her. And so, something I find really touching is that so far she doesn't seem to have lost that sense of self. Yes, she is very vengeful. She can't control her rage at all. How would you expect her to? She is filled with this anger. She is much more laid back and uncaring about things, whereas before she was deeply passionate about everything. Post time skip, you can tell she's given up on trying to put effort into things that she just doesn't care about. She's really honed in and focused on very specific things that she cares about, but the things that she does care about, she deeply cares about. Powder being one of them, Jinx being one of them. She's hunting her down because she wants to save her. She wants to find her sister, provide her with a home again. She wants to do right by her. She misses her home. She greets all the people she once knew. And all that. So I think it's very heartwarming that Violet, despite having changed, is very much the same person. She has heeded Vander's advice that he gave her, or his last words, not last words, but those words he gave her all that time ago, pre-time skip. I'm glad that she's kept that sense of self, because Jinx is very much struggling with that, but Vi is still very much Vi, and so far, she stayed true to what Vander asked of her. And that's great. The fight with Savika was great. Again, very dynamic. Awesome fight scene. Again, like I mentioned before, that walk there. Really interesting execution of that. And then as Savika is about to kill her, we have Caitlyn coming in to save the day. And I like that while Violet is showing her all these things about the Undercity and providing her with this information, it isn't one-sided. Violet is not teaching her everything. Caitlyn just saved her neck. So it's mutually beneficial sort of thing. I just love how they complement one another and their cute banter at the end. And also, I mentioned during the reaction, but it was really interesting to see a bit of the world building. So now we see that Shimmer has not just become this thing that you ingest or consume through the test tubes or a bottle or whatever, just through drinking it. Savika has this sort of contraption on her arm that allows her to be powered by it just through a couple of button pushes or something that injects it into her bloodstream. And she becomes powered by it through that means. And I noticed that she really maintained her sense of self. Maybe it was a lower dose, I'm not sure, but she really seemed to, she was very coherent. She wasn't totally feral and beast-like like the thug pre-time skip, who wasn't able to adjust to it at all. So maybe over time, depending on your reaction to the shimmer, depending on how often you use it maybe, some people seem to be able to better adjust to it, to use it as a weapon, and not become totally poisoned by it. I'm not sure, but she seems to be functioning pretty well with it, unless there's something that I missed, or maybe in later episodes they'll show that she has some sort of withdrawal or addiction to it. Not sure. But from what we saw, it seems to be some sort of weapon that, if used in moderation, can be harnessed and is not completely harmful to the person. I assumed initially that consuming Shimmer would lead to your former life being completely over, you not being able to function as a human being, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So that was a main plot thread that we had. Another one would be, the most natural spot to go to would be Victor and Jace and Medarda and all of the politics of Piltover. I said before that I really enjoy the politics of Piltover from episode 2. Immediately it stuck out to me as something that was very interesting and very rich, and very nuanced and subtle with a lot of thought put into it. And this was maybe the best example of it, the best execution of it so far. And that is saying a lot, because up until this point, it's been great. I think this was even better, mainly through Victor, Jace, Medarda, and all these interactions, and some subtext for Heimerdinger. Even though I don't think he spoke a line. He did get some interesting character work from this. So we'll start from the beginning. We have a bit of an argument between Victor and Jace, at the end of last episode, as Jace did not want to reveal everything they're working on to the world in his speech, And also the thing that he said to the council of him not wanting to continue with Hextech operations as long as these mysteries of what's going on, these attacks, are unsolved. So he essentially is keeping things a secret, is not putting these projects out into the open, and is not wanting to continue with Hextech operations right now. His caution is taking over, that 10% that I mentioned in the previous episode. Again, a great layer to to Jace's character. But of course, Victor is not having any of that at all. He's not happy with that. He wants to keep progressing because he sees his health. He sees that he may not have much time left, and so he wants to do as much as he can, as quick as he can. He wants to progress things. He wants to do all of this. He wants his dreams to be fulfilled, and he sees the hourglass ticking away. And it's very sad because Jace seems to have all the time in the world to deliberate and heed Heimerdinger's advice in that way. Victor doesn't. He's sick. He coughed up blood. He passed out. This isn't a situation where Victor can bide his time. He wants to do these things now. He wants to see the fruits of his labors now. And that feeds into that side of discovery, that wonder. He wants to experience as much as he can right now. But the thing is, he is embodying that sort of reckless side of discovery that Jace was embodying early on because he wants to do what he can now. Him and Jace are very much kindred spirits, and he's showing that here. But meanwhile, we see that Jace is also, as a counselor, he's involved with looking over a lot of the shipping details, the labor reports, all of that stuff that's going on. And he notices discrepancies. He's noticing that things are not quite adding up. And so he goes to the source, the sheriff, Marcus, and he says, "Things are not adding up, my dude. What's going on? I need to get to the bottom of this." Little does he know that he's talking to the bottom of this. So Marcus is feeling more and more heat, and which just ramps up the pressure in his psyche. So, yeah, Jace is an intelligent guy. He's not going to let this go. He's not going to let any stone go unturned. And that is bad news for both Silco and Marcus. So, interesting dynamic there. Something that I didn't dwell on quite as much as I wanted to in this discussion is that also between Victor and Jace is this contrast in that Jace, in focusing on his duties as counselor, in trying to become more political, again, not by desire, but by necessity, in focusing on all these other different tasks, he is drifting away from the reason that he and Victor started this endeavor in the first place. And Victor is very aware of this, and he's very upset by this. Victor is very much focused on benefiting society, on making things right, and on eventually benefiting the Undercity. They talk about this in their conversation right before Marcus comes in, where Victor's just saying, why are you focusing on this smuggling and all of these things that are happening? We need to be progressing Hextech. Obviously, in the back of his mind, he has the idea that, he has to be doing these things as quickly as he can, but also he just wants to benefit society. Whereas he thinks that Jace, that his eyes are, exploring other avenues that aren't as beneficial, that aren't focused on why they're doing this in the first place. So there's also a contrast, not just in their demeanor and positions of power sort of thing, and their well-being, but in terms of what they're eyeing. Victor is very much focused on what their goal is, even if he's getting a bit reckless in doing it because of lack of time. Whereas Jace, his eyes are shifting, He's not as focused. So yeah, I don't think I mentioned that at all. If I did, it wasn't much in this discussion. So I just wanted to add that in here because it's an important comparison between these two characters at this point in time. But while they're talking, Victor coughs up that blood and has some sort of a vision. He had this sort of thing twice. I don't know what this means at all. I've got no really guesses, no theories. I guess I'll just wait to see how it plays out, but it's very interesting. It didn't seem to be him just his vision fogging up because of due to being sick or lightheaded because of his sickness. It seemed to be something else. He wasn't, bleary-eyed, completely passing out when looking at whatever he was looking at. He seemed to look at it in wonder, in curiosity. So, I'm not sure. Very interesting, though. So then we go to the opera. Just to get this out of the way, again, I didn't mention this scene when I was talking about the direction and aesthetics. This scene was amazingly presented. The music itself was good. The atmosphere of being in this aristocratic theater and all these counselors watching it while at the same time discussing what quote-unquote unsavory deals they might have on hand, and all these sorts of things, all these unofficial things. The idea that all of these counselors go to these sorts of performances to do these unofficial transactions is really cool and very realistic, and it adds a nice dimension to Piltover's politics. But just the occasion, the sense of occasion it brought, it was so lyrical and artistic, and I loved the vibe of this whole scene as Jace watches it so conflicted and thinking, how naive am I really? Am I gonna really have to play this game that I don't really want to? And Medarda coerces him into it. She says some very true things, by having such a hardline stance on the things you're doing, by strengthening your grip on the smuggling operations, by making such very straightforward proclamations and policies, you're putting a target on yourself for all the sort of people in power that use these avenues for their own profit. That's just how this world is. That's just how Piltover is. And he's got to realize that. You can't simply work at the top. You can't achieve things through ideals alone. If you just follow them narrowly like he was doing with his research, you are not going to succeed. You are going to be people's enemy. You're going to have a target on your back. And Medarda is very much correct about this. That's just how things work. She's very much helping him by telling him these things because he has to do that to survive at the top. If he's going to be a counselor, he has to do this. If he wants to continue to progress things, if he wants Hextech to continue to be successful, and if he wants to continue being the golden boy, in that I don't think he necessarily wants this praise and glory. That's just not who Jace is at this point in time, but he wants the influence to continue to serve the world in the way he sees fit. So, and he does want that. So he takes her advice. He begins conducting these deals, and she looks on very proudly. She's such an interesting character, Medarda. I don't know, still at this moment, maybe I'm being too cynical and untrustworthy. I don't know if she's genuinely interested in Jace as a romantic partner, because we know, as we see, they make love, they have sex, they consummate their touchy-feely relationship in that way, which tells me that they hadn't done that before. I was kind of wondering about that in episode 4 when they showed her sort of putting her hands on him. I was wondering if that was hinting at them being romantic partners already. It seems like that wasn't the case, and this was the episode where that happened. Anyway, I still don't know if she wants Jace because she sees him as her avenue to more power, to more status, and being successful in her family, to being the most prominent member of her family, where she is not recognized properly in her eyes. I don't know if she's using Jace for that, or if she genuinely loves him, or sees a romantic future with him, or both. It could easily be both. It could be any one of those three things, and I'm not exactly sure. Though I'm most confident in it being either, in it being not pure romance. I think to some extent she is vesting an interest in him because of the future she sees with him in terms of influence on society, influence in Piltover. I think that there is an element of pragmatism to this, because that's just the type of person she is. She's so crafty, she's so ambitious, so I can't imagine that her interest in Jace, her relationship with Jace, doesn't have foundations there. Just to add on to one of the things I was saying about Medarda, I mentioned in episode 2, upon first meeting her, upon the first impression we got of her, that through the gesture, the little tiny gesture we got all the way back of her giving that fake toy, or the child's toy, to the other counselor, and being amused that he would see value in it despite it being a complete hoax, I saw that theme of power and value being an illusion, and that leading to and extrapolating to the idea of politics in this place just being, insubstantial. Medarda sees it as kind of a game, of a bit of a joke. And so I think that is illustrated really well in this episode. The way she gets Jace to play the game. She sees it as, just all these other counselors, they're just silly players in this game. And she thinks of it as, I think that she actually thinks of this as child's play. I think that she enjoys it, but at the same time, it's it's easy for her because she knows how things work. She knows this is all posturing. This is all playing. This is playing the game. And I think we saw that. I think the first interaction we saw with her and the counselor about the fake toy, the child's toy, about it being about her selling it as valuable, I think that was hugely indicative of how she would maneuver these political situations. You have to put on that face, you have to play that role, and then it's pretty easy, right? And she's teaching Jace this now. And so I just thought it was interesting to connect that back to her the first impression we get of her. And the contrast between them having sex and cutting over to Victor as he's slaving over these experiments. And we see the blood, the droplet of blood, go into the whatever contraption that was, a very clear allusion to what was going on in their situation, in their bedroom. Very, very artistic there to sort of merge those two situations together while showing the huge contrast in fortunes as Victor continues to sort of spiral downwards. He faints, slaving over this experiment, trying with all his might, with his life's power, with all that he has left in his life, to achieve these things, to enact his dream. In contrast to Jace, who is now betting a very powerful person, who is now playing the Game of Thrones in Piltover. As much as he might not have initially wanted to do these things, he's being a bit more dishonest now. He is doing the things he needs to gain influence, and he's playing the long game, whereas Victor's being much more direct. And in that scene, we see their fortunes diverging, one of them clearly rising, one of them clearly falling. And you get the impression that is indicative of their partnership slowly falling apart. But at the end of it, once again, we see that Jace has not lost sight of things, not by any stretch. He has not forgotten his partner, his kindred spirit, the person who saved his life and breathed life into his experiments. In the morning, Medarda wakes up all by herself, and Victor wakes up, and he is not by himself. He has Jace by his side. Jace very much still cares so much for him. He looked very upset at Victor's state, and we don't know how much time Victor has, but I can't imagine it's long at all. So again, amazing execution of Piltover's story, Jace's story, Medarda's role, and Victor. But I also mentioned that Heimerdinger had a bit of a role to play in this episode as well, despite not speaking in it. And I think there's quite a bit of symbolism in that theater scene again, that performance. After Jace sort of accepts that he's going to have to do these deals, in the montage where he's doing this, brilliantly presented again, he notably goes to every single counselor, I think. He goes to the woman. He goes with that thing on her neck. There's Medarda, of course. He goes to the robot man. I don't know. He's got the mechanical face. He goes to the counselor who got Medarda's toy and the one he was sitting with. So I don't remember how many exactly there are on the council. But I think he makes deals with all... Oh, and of course, Caitlin's mother. So that's Medarda, Caitlin's mother, those two, the robot man, the woman, and Heimerdinger. And I think that's it. And then him being the eighth. Anyways, I could be wrong. Either way, I think he made deals with every single counselor except Heimerdinger, which is very interesting. That's very intentional, too. That's not a coincidence that as all these people are making all these deals, not even just with Jace, Heimerdinger is just listening to the opera and enjoying it and losing himself in it. I think that's very representative of the idea of Heimerdinger, again, being stuck in the past. In the current Piltover, you have to be doing these sorts of things to maintain power in all areas. That's just how society is now, and Heimerdinger doesn't seem to be doing that. He is notably the only person who is seen by himself the whole time, front and center watching the whole performance, whereas everyone else has at least one other person they were talking to at some instance. And I think that tells us quite a bit about Heimerdinger, and it tells us quite a bit about Jace and Medarda, that he did not talk to him about a deal. They know his stance on these sorts of things. And I think through Jace doing this, it's indicative of the idea that he may have said we're going to stop Hextech operations, but I think they're going to ramp up again now. I think he's been convinced to. I think that's what that might have been symbolizing. Either way, Piltover, brilliant again. And then lastly, the last plotline of the episode that I have to talk about is Jinx and Silco. I wanted more material for them in this episode, and We got a ton of it. It was awesome. Culminating in that great final scene in the water where Silco himself lost his eye and was betrayed in his eyes by Vander. The first thing is, so Jinx begins the episode seeming to be working on the gem and trying to harness the power there. She finds it very difficult and doesn't really understand it, all that sort of thing. And the explosion that occurs as a result of her error reminds her of the traumatizing explosion she caused at the end of episode 3. Classic PTSD sort of symptoms that bring up, again, these psychological scars. Just another indicator of where her mind's at. This is a constant thing that plagues her. So then she travels to the part of the Undercity where her and her friends used to hang out, that arcade sort of thing. And she does the little punching machine or whatever it was that she remembered Violet doing a lot when they were kids or when they were younger. And that struck me as a very important scene, but I'm going to be upfront, I don't know exactly what it means. I don't know if it represents Jinx through physical means, trying to psychologically beat out her guilt, her scars, psychological scars of Violet, trying to get that out of her brain just by punching like the memory of Violet. Maybe she was envisioning beating her or doing a better performance than her, or maybe she was envisioning fighting her. There was a split screen where younger Violet was on one side, and Jinx was on the other, so that could be something to it. I don't know for sure, but what I think it is some sort of physical manifestation of her psychological scars, which happens a lot with that sort of thing, and she's trying to just beat it out in some way. And I think she would like to remember a lot of the fond times, but she just can't, for obvious reasons. She's only focused on the negatives. And so then we get a scene between Marcus and Silco, where Marcus is talking to him, and Silco gives him the firelight thing to plant. These continuing problems with the Golden Boy looking into their affairs and getting closer and closer. And Silco just keeps telling him these things to do, and Marcus storms off. One thing that's important to Marcus's character work that I didn't mention earlier is that when he's given the firelight's prop by Silco, he imagines himself blowing himself up. That's a great summation of his mental states. I think if he really acted with his heart on his sleeve, he'd do that. But he has a daughter. He probably just wants to live, even if he's living a life that makes him miserable right now. That was an interesting scene. I think it showed a great summation of his mental state at this point, and a representation of the conflict, the turmoil he's experiencing internally. But after that, Silco tells Jinx, he's not doing well. He's sort of unraveling, and he tells her that he needs her to discover the secrets and harness this gem that she stole. He says specifically, "You're my only hope." And he mentions that in reference to the gem, but I think there's a dual meaning to that. At this point, given their interactions, I think that he genuinely sees her as the closest person to him right now. She's his only hope for material means, obviously, but for connection maybe as well. I don't know. And then he decides, after seeing that she shares with him, she can't stop seeing Violet. She can't let go of her or her childhood times that bring her so much misery. When he sees that, he decides that he has to do something. And so he takes her to the waters where he was betrayed again by Vander, where he got his injury. And he says, "This is where a weak man died, and this is where he rose up." He saw that sort of baptism. Again, it's very directly alluding to a baptism. He sees it as a place where people can leave their weak selves behind. For him, the weak self was the person who looked at death, looked at drowning as a comfort, as it beckoning him in and telling him, rest on your laurels. Life may be difficult if you want to chase this respect for your people, for you and your people. If you want Zahn to be as monumental as Piltover is, life will be difficult if you try to do that. So just come. Just rest in the waters. He disposed of the weak man who even entertained that notion even a little bit, and became someone with the strongest conviction you can imagine. And so he wants the same thing for Jinx. He wants Jinx to leave Powder behind. There are inherent sort of negative connotations to that. There may seem to be inherent negative connotations to that, because Powder was a very sweet girl. She clearly had some mental fragilities, some psychological issues, and insecurities. But overall, she was a very sweet person who just wanted to contribute and be loved and all that sort of thing. And she was very endearing. And so seeing Jinx now is a very stark difference, a stark contrast. We can see her personality taking a complete shift, a complete 180, and because of it, there may be an inclination in the viewer to see this change as something that isn't truly her. But is that really the case, though? In episode 4 and this episode, you'd see me grimacing in the reactions because I see all the things that are different about her, but I attribute them to her problems that she's experiencing in her mind. She's remembering Milo, she's remembering Clagger, and Vi, most of all. And the things she did, and how she was never useful. And that she's resigned to being this sort of person, and as a result, this reaction formation causes her to be the most powerful version of herself. And I looked at it negatively because I associated all of that with her trauma. But who says that Jinx isn't her real self at this point? She's changed so much, but I imagine that the change was stark from that moment in episode 3. And she's been this person, it seems like, for years. This is probably just her now. She still cares for Vi, I'm sure, but that doesn't mean that she hasn't changed into the person she is now. And so Silco here is trying to rid her of the trauma. All the negative things I associated with this Jinx, and me feeling sympathy for her, had to do with those psychological issues that she's experiencing. And Silco wants to get rid of those. He wants her personality to remain, minus all the bad stuff. Now, of course, Jinx is killing people. Like, that speaks for itself. I would never approve of that sort of thing. But if we look at Silco's intentions, I don't think the idea of her being Jinx and not Powder anymore is inherently negative at all, because he wants to get rid of all the negative things associated with that. In his eyes, killing people isn't a problem. In his eyes, the problem is that she can't move on, and she's experiencing pain because of that. He wants her to be rid of the pain, of the fear, of all of that. And I think he wants the best for her. I really do. I think becoming Jinx in totality will obviously result in material benefit for him. She'll probably become a more valuable asset to him. As big of an asset as she is right now, she'll probably be better. But I also just think he cares for her and wants her to move on. He wants for her what happened to him, to move on from the pain and become a more enlightened, in his eyes, person. And by the end, she undergoes the baptism. So I don't know if that's going to be effective in having her completely forget about everything. I think time will tell for that. I'm not sure if it'll work. But what we do know is that Jinx trusts him enough to have done that. Silco cares for her enough to have done that. I think at this point, it's hard to say that Silco and Jinx's connection is significantly less powerful than Vi and Powder's connection was. It's probably not quite there, but I think it's getting there. I think they have a very unshakable bond at this point. Mutual care for one another, mutual interest. And Silco, if it wasn't obvious before, he definitely cares for Jinx. And that whole scene was just amazing. Something else that I think is really noteworthy, that I'm just noticing in editing, is that during one of the shots we see of Jinx working on the gem, I think it was, we see that the bunny toy, the famous bunny toy that I can't stop talking about, that Violet gave to her, that representation of childish idealism, freedom, a fulfilling life, etc., the toy that I overthink about, we see that it's there. She's hung it up on top of her workstation or whatever that is. She's keeping it with her. So clearly there's some semblance of, or some meaning to that. She's holding on to this memory of Violet, what that means for her personally, what that represents. So as much as she tries to bury it, I mean, this was shown in the episode itself as well through her trauma and all her flashbacks and whatever, but as much as she tries to bury it, she cannot stop thinking about Violet. She cannot stop keeping her objects, these things that represent Violet to her, close to her. So I thought that was worth pointing out. So I think that does it. I think that's about everything I wanted to cover. So much substance in this episode. This was my longest reaction yet, as I suspected it would be, but hopefully it's been enjoyable in some way. I definitely enjoyed talking about it. So yeah, this show is so good. It just keeps going from strength to strength. I can't wait to see what episode 6 has in store. And yeah, thanks again for watching, and see you in the next one.